Top lane is a role known for a lot of things. Chief among them would be the apparent impossibility of solo carrying a losing team under general circumstances, and has been referred to as a coin flip role due to a lack of agency from the player, at least from the beginning of the game, which happens to be the segment that often sets the tone for the rest of a match. As such, those who are brazen enough to reach the highest levels of the game have tailored their pool of units to consist of champions well known for being self-sufficient, scaling extremely well, and being extremely dangerous to take on, especially in head-on confrontation. While there are a good number of candidates suited to meet that criteria, arguably no one does this better than the Grand Duelist. Ever since her VGU, Fiora has been a staple presence in top lane, perennially maintaining her grasp on a good chunk of market share regardless of the meta. As a member of the humorously yet aptly named 4 Horsewomen of top lane, it was high time I go over her, and to be honest, I'm surprised it took me this long to finally get around to this champ. So let's not waste any more time and dive into why everyone plays Fiora. Back in my video explaining the 5 roles, I mentioned how the key win condition for top laners is less about carrying games and more about pressure, specifically drawing pressure. The isolated nature of top lane discourages most teams from investing too many resources and manpower in the early game, leaving said top laners to fend for themselves for better or worse. As a result, the outcome of top lane heavily depends on who wins the 1v1, a situation that tends to favor whoever locks in the champion second, and why so many top laners ask to be the last pick on the team. Contrary to popular belief, a measurable number of matchups are in fact nearly impossible to overcome through skill unless the player with the advantage has absolutely no fundamental understanding of their champion. For example, Mordekaiser is proficient at shutting down Malphite due to his penchant for magic damage, his ability to match Malphite's lane harass, being a manaless champion, and having comparable if not greater durability overall. Assuming basic understanding from both players, the Mordekaiser has no excuse if they lose lane, external intervention notwithstanding of course. Counterpick resilience is of paramount importance in top lane, and there's 2 ways that can be highlighted. The first is to have a favorable matchup spread in terms of combat, or in other words, the champion goes either even with or wins against the majority of conventional top lane picks. That's partly why Aatrox, our last why everyone plays champion, manages to see consistent play. The second is to scale better than most of the top laners without forfeiting too much priority in the early game. That happens to fall into Fiora's area of expertise. Given her literal title, the Grand Duelist, Fiora has everything you would expect from the Skirmisher class: extremely high DPS output that gets even better as the game goes on, specializes in single combat, has rushdown capabilities, and situationally powerful defensive tools that can straight up nullify some champions' entire pressure altogether, at the expense of being a melee champion with poor striking range, exclusively auto-attack related damage, and poor teamfight pressure if not done so carefully. Then again, most of the situations Fiora naturally finds herself in happen to ignore most of those weaknesses, while at the same time being almost unstoppable if on even footing in said situations. But going back to matchup resilience for a moment, that's where we encounter reason 1 behind Fiora's widespread use. While there are a sizable number of champs that quote-unquote beat her, their advantage has a time limit. Fiora ranks among the best top laners in terms of scaling, eventually being able to strike down champs that previously bullied her in lane. So long as you minimize your losses and survive until your 2 or 3 item power spike, you can easily turn the tables against just about anyone in the game because your scaling cannot be mitigated in any way. Compliments of Duelist Dance. I talked about Fiora's passive a number of times and even more copiously voiced my disdain towards it. When striking an enemy champion at one of the 4 cardinal directions, she deals bonus max out true damage, deals a small amount, and gains a surge of movement speed before another vital is opened up just shy of 2 seconds later. Fiora's passive comprises the bulk of her DPS, and the rest of her kit is designed to allow her to strike vitals as efficiently as possible. Now when it comes to scaling via items, the idea is for one item to match another if we disregard the champion's internal properties. For example, if you build a BF sword and your opponent builds a chain vest, the increase in attack damage should theoretically be kept in check by the increase in armor from the opponent. It then comes down to the champion's own attributes to make that difference, as in if they benefit more from that item than just the stats it provides. Of course, if you purchase an item first or have more items than your opponent, you're scaling at a faster rate than them, and that's the whole incentive behind obtaining a gold lead. Percent max out true damage is the only form of damage that cannot be mitigated under any circumstances. Physical damage can be reduced via armor, magic damage can be reduced via magic resist. True damage, to some extent, can be reduced by building health. This law holds true for any form of physical or magic damage as well. If your opponent has a crap ton of percent health physical damage, like Kled, it's preferable to itemize armor over health, as the percent health damage nullifies the usefulness of boosting your max HP. However, percent max out true damage not only ignores armor and magic resist, but you can't even build health. Fiora's passive will always deal a set amount of your health bar per hit. What separates her from the likes of Vayne or Camille with Divine Sunder is that her percent health true damage scales. Early on, she has to strike more than a dozen vitals to wipe out your health bar from just a passive, but towards 4, 5, and 6 items, that number drops down to 5 or less, transforming her from a duelist into an assassin whose pressure is no less devastating on a tank than it is on a squishy, and that's not even accounting for the raw physical damage dealt by her autos, her Q, and E. Fiora's rate of scaling far outpaces most top laners, to the point where the only ones who can keep up with her in the late game are those with mechanics that outright stop her from getting those vitals off. This can be in the form of straight up not letting them proc on her, such as Jax's Counter-Strike or Teemo's Blind, positionally outplaying her like a Vayne, or just brute forcing your way through like Tryndamere and Kaele's immunity. Everyone else effectively gets f***ed by Fiora in the late game, since their damage can be mitigated by resistances while hers cannot. Basically, Fiora almost always has time on her side. It doesn't matter if you play someone who statistically does well against her in lane, if her team survives long enough, she can and will outscale not just the enemy top laner, but most of the champions in the game. It eventually reaches a point where the enemy team has to send at least 2 people to match her side lane or go full on Saving Private Ryan if they want to stop her from destroying their carry. Late game hypercarries like her are not an uncommon sight. Kassadin, Master Yi, Kaele, Vayne, every lane has at least a handful of them that you have to watch out for. Thankfully, hypercarries are among the easiest champions to exploit in the early game. Their poor lane pressure and or low base stat line gives their opponent a chance to shut them down and snowball their lead before they get to do anything, and that's usually what happens. Kaele has arguably one of the worst laning phases of all time, so despite going 1v9 Thanos mode at level 16, it's exceedingly rare for her to get to that point unless her jungler camps her like a dog on a leash. The one exception to this is Fiora. Her laning phase is deceptively quite serviceable. Granted, it depends on the meta, who's strong and whatnot, and in fairness, seasons 12 and 13 have been rather harsh on her in regards to nerfs. But she doesn't have the same tendency of getting completely screwed over if you blind pick her. It's not like you pick Riven and the enemy top laner insta-locks Renekton or Pantheon, then you have to pray they suck at the champ. She has 3 things that allow her to survive lane reasonably comfortably. Riposte is the big one. For 3/4 of a second, she becomes completely invincible to any and all hostile interactions barring tower shots. This means during that time, she takes no damage and cancels out any negative effects that come her way, including debuffs or status effects. For instance, she can parry Ignite and Exhaust if she uses it preemptively. This makes Riposte potentially the strongest defensive ability to ever exist. Stronger than Tryndamere's ultimate, Kaele's ultimate, Yasuo's Windwall, everything. Considering a wide range of characters have attacks or abilities that have delayed applications or cast times, Fiora's W is for all intents and purposes a spell shield and counter-strike that can block more than one ability, albeit in a shorter time frame. Coincidentally, many top laners bank on a single attack or ability to exert their pressure. Urgot's ultimate, Darius' ultimate, Malphite ultimate, Set W, Sion Q, Jax counter-strike, Gangplank Barrel, Aatrox Q, Camille Q, I think that's about it. And for many of them, it's not even like a skill thing. You can easily react to Aatrox's final Q and parry it 10 out of 10 times. Speaking of parrying, if she negates at least one hard crowd control, the strike back turns into a 2-second stun, practically resulting in death, especially in the late game as she can proc all 4 vitals and Grand Challenge in that time frame. Riposte alone turns many matchups into an easy win for her, so you have someone whose damage you can't mitigate in any way, and she has a way to shut down your entire game plan depending on the champion you play. One more thing, even if she doesn't parry hard CC, she still halves your attack and movement speed if you get hit, screwing over anyone who relies on auto attacks or attack speed to deal damage. The second asset that gives her survivability in lane is Poke. Lunge is a short-range, low cooldown dash that auto-targets the nearest enemy for a bit of damage that applies on-hit effects. In essence, her Q gives her a pseudo-ranged attack. This means she can hit vitals from a relatively safe distance. Not only do those vitals deal true damage, but they heal her, keeping her somewhat healthy. Thanks to this, Fiora players often run Grasp in more difficult situations and just Q spam over and over to not only heal but gain HP. With how short her Q cooldown is, by 20 minutes you can effortlessly acquire 40 or more stacks of Grasp. That's almost 300 bonus health for free. Also, the on-hit component makes her Q synergize famously with Spellblade, namely Divine Sunder, further increasing her poke damage and sustain. Once she gets this item, she can win lane by poking you over and over again. The third asset is her mobility. Fiora is one of the slipperiest champs in the game. Fast repositioning lets her sidestep skill shots like Mundo Cleaver or delayed cast abilities like Cho'Gath Q. Once again, this makes it really difficult for certain champs to beat her if she can dodge half of your stuff and parry the other half. A frequent argument I hear in defense of her is that if she falls behind, she's useless. But in my opinion, as the next Fiora main and someone who's played against her millions of times, every champion is useless when behind. That's the whole point of falling behind. Now I know what you're gonna say, even if Malphite is 0-10, if he lands the cleanest 5-man ultimate, he's still useful, and that's true. Fiora contributes literally nothing but damage, but the kind of damage she outputs is, as mentioned earlier, impossible to build against. A 3-item and boots Fiora can beat down a full build Ornn or Sion. The other defense is that Fiora sucks in teamfights, and that's somewhat valid. While I gassed her up as this matchup Brazilian top lane who outscales everyone, that's mostly within the confines of top lane. Since itemizing defense offers no benefit to you when facing her, the only way to beat Fiora is to deal damage faster than she can, and there are a lot of chances you can do that, specifically because Fiora's greatest strength only comes into play if she's in melee range of her target of interest. If the enemy team consists of long range or kiting champs, she'll lose most of her health just trying to get close, and if they have stalling elements like say Kindred ultimate or peel tools, Fiora can struggle to get back into the fray once she's thrown out. Unlike Irelia or Camille whose mobility allows them to gap close from a far distance, Fiora's mobility is more known for sidestepping or repositioning. If the enemy team stays just outside of her threat bubble, there's nothing she can do. However, she has an alternative win condition. Ever since her lunge and blade work got changed to work on towers, her split pushing capabilities have skyrocketed. She's probably in the top 5 or at the very least top 10 fastest split pushers in the game. It's degenerate and unsportsmanlike, but there are tons of games where the 0-7 Fiora full mutes all and just runs down a side lane for the entire game and manages to win because she's not worth any gold and is really only there to waste your resources and time. If the enemy team doesn't give her a favorable scenario in teamfights, she can create her own favorable scenario by forcing them to split up and send one or more to stop her. If they don't have an equally powerful side lane presence to match her split push, that gives their team an overwhelming macro advantage. Doesn't matter how behind she is in lane, she can dismantle towers with just Divine Sunder and Ravenous Hydra. And by that point in the game, she starts doing 10% max health true damage per vital, high enough to where you can lose to her 1v1 even if you have an item over her. Hypothetically though, let's say you're playing someone who contests Fiora in the side lane. That's still a net positive for her. If you're 7-0 Darius against the 0-7 Fiora, your team gives up more pressure and resources by sending you after her than Fiora's team. At the same time, you can't ignore her unless you want her to backdoor your Nexus. If your team is unable to win the 4v4 or needs your assistance, Fiora's very existence traps you in a lose-lose situation. Also, I should clear something up, Fiora's team fighting is not as bad as you think. She's an excellent sweeper, meaning she's quite good at cleaning up the enemy team after the initial engage. When everyone's wounded or the team is scattered, she can go in and pick off opponents one by one, and the last thing you want to do against her is to take her on one at a time. You either dogpile on her or run like hell. This makes her a fantastic solo queue champ to one-trick as teamfights are messy and uncoordinated. With the right teleport or flank, you can one-shot the half HP Lee Sin or whoever and get that healing zone off before snowballing on the rest of the team. Ultimately, Fiora's biggest appeal is that she has options. She's not like a juggernaut who only has one or two things they can do or a very predictable win condition. Fiora can shift gears. If she has a rough matchup, she can opt for a poke spam build using Grasp and Divine Sunder. If she falls behind in lane, she can split push and draw pressure. If she wins lane, you're upper creek for the rest of the match, and she has the right set of tools to completely shut down a huge portion of the cast. There's no two ways about it. She's broken, always has been. But that's why so many people like to use her. Am I saying she's an instant win button? No, Fiora takes an extraordinary amount of patience and precision, true to her theme. But when mastered, I dare say, of the 4 horsewomen of top lane, she's by far the strongest. There's not a single top laner in Challenger, Grandmaster, etc. who doesn't play Fiora. In high elo, she's almost obligatory to have as a pocket pick at the very least. I may have been a little generous with my assessment of her, but the empirical data is there. There's too many things she gets away with by virtue of her kit that very few top laners can come even close to. And I hate her for it, even though I used to main her. Anyways, what do you guys think about Fiora? Do you agree or disagree with my points? Be sure to let me know in the comments down below. That's gonna be it for today, so if you enjoyed the video, it would be awesome if you could leave a like and subscribe. Consider following me on Twitter at Vars, joining my Discord server, and checking out my other Why Everyone Plays episodes if you haven't yet. But for now, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon in the next one. Take care.